Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Performance Talk. My name is Yule Gordon. I am here with Dr. Joni Boyd. And
Mhm.
thank you, Dr. Boyd, for having a really easy name to pronounce
Yes,
uh, because I've been known to butcher a name or two, not on purpose. I try to respect everybody's name and pronounce it right, but sometimes it just gets like mush in my face and doesn't come out right.
I get
How
it.
are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. And you?
I'm doing great. For our audience, tell them a little bit about yourself and coming from, or working in at least, the great state of South Carolina.
Sure. Thank you. So I am excited to be here, but I am a professor of exercise science and coaching at Winthrop University in Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is a town just south of Charlotte. We're just 8 miles from the city of Charlotte, technically, right across the border from North Carolina.
Hmm.
So if you're familiar with that area, that's where we're located. We are a relatively small Division I school, but we really work, hard to make our footprint in the exercise science, sport performance, strength and conditioning area of what we do with our students. That's really a big focus for us. So I enjoy teaching and leading and guiding students to, careers that are related in some way to our field. And as you mentioned earlier, another part of what or as you asked earlier, another part of what I do is I am currently managing and the project manager for a big grant that we have in South Carolina to implement exercise, much needed exercise,
Yes, indeed.
into into the nursing homes, skilled nursing homes in South Carolina. So we can
Okay.
certainly chat about that throughout our conversation today. But those are my two big, responsibilities: is to lead students and to try to incorporate that exercise within those homes in our state.
Okay. So, full disclosure, I just left South Carolina in 2018. So I'm very familiar, and I lived on the north side of Columbia, right near 77.
Gotcha.
So that was, and my daughter played soccer, so she was back and forth to Winthrop several
Mhm.
times. Um, and then so that's just all the full disclosure part. In case we get down a rabbit hole about South Carolina, we can we can talk about that a
We
little bit.
certainly
Uh, but let's start off with exercise science and sports science and sports performance and why it is important in the landscape of today's athletics and and how you become a professional.
Wow, that's a great conversation and really a very multidimensional response. To be honest, um, I recall being an athlete myself at my undergrad at University of North Carolina at Wilmington, and my reason for going there to be an athlete, of course, was first, but secondly, I chose Wilmington because I initially thought I wanted to be a marine biologist, and
Okay.
that was a very good school in that program. But when I arrived on campus, I had a biology class and I had a health class, and the health class was more of a general health class. And between the two, I knew very quickly that biology wasn't for me, and I needed something along the lines of health. And my health professor, in a conversation, again, another reason why professors are so important when they lead students is
Right.
he introduced me to this idea of a strength and conditioning coach, because at that time it wasn't an everyday conversation. There
Right.
wasn't a it wasn't a Twitter conversation. There was nothing that really pushed that field forward at that time. And when I realized what a strength and conditioning professional responsibilities were, what they would do, I was immediately knew that that's what I wanted to do. I immediately knew that my role as an athlete, while I loved my sport, I loved what I felt in the weight room, in performance,
Right.
working those variables. So I worked very hard from that point to understand and to create a career in the performance field. man, has it grown since then. If you look at that was in the late 90s. And if you look at the movement of the field from just a simple strength weight room concept, just get bigger, get faster, get stronger, right? We
Yeah.
moved from that to this very multidimensional concept of sports science. I mean, sports science doesn't exist if strength and conditioning doesn't push the field forward the way that it did. And now we have a much better understanding, within the research that we do, the coaching styles, the health of the athlete. I think it's truly probably been the best movement for all athletes in the last 30 to 40 years in any sport, is the development of our field in strength and conditioning, because it is so multidimensional and it does have so many roots in other things. And it's cross generational, it's cross cultural, it's cross sports. I mean, there's nothing, that defines it necessarily, because it is so dimensional.
Right. I know from my background, and I can go back to the late 70s, early 80s when I was an athlete, way back in the Stone Age. That I was fortunate to have coaches that were ahead of their time, and
That's great.
we had a weight room. It was pretty rudimentary by today's standards, but it was everything we needed by those standards back then, to just be aware of, how you could help yourself as an athlete, and how you could help your general overall health and fitness as a person. And
Absolutely.
we had at least three coaches when I was in high school that brought in machines, brought in weights, and preached exercise in the off season, preached you know cross training and all these other things, that led me to the profession. And but it wasn't a profession until, and some people don't know, it wasn't a profession until like maybe the mid 90s. There was an exercise science class out there somewhere, and a strength conditioning classes as a class didn't even come along,
That's
as you
correct.
know, until the teens sometime.
That's
So
correct.
11, 12, somewhere in there. So I and folks like me um, had to go into physical education, which was
Yeah.
which was great, because I think we've lost a little bit of the physical education part.
Absolutely.
But we didn't have the strength and conditioning part back then.
That's right.
You had Muscle and Fitness magazine, and magazines like that. That's where you got your weightlifting from, unless you had those types of coaches that were, hey, look, think about this or think about that. So when we're talking about the evolution of this profession, and some of the things you just mentioned about, you know, how far it's come, and strength conditioning pushing some of those other areas, kind of explain to our listeners what you mean by that, because for so many right now, Dr. Boyd, there's always been strength and conditioning. There's
Yeah,
always been sports science. For
that's right.
a lot of these young athletes, they don't understand that, there was barely an athletic trainer at some schools, and if you got hurt, you got slapped in somebody's car, and you went to the all night doc in a box.
That's absolutely correct. And I can tell you that, first off, doing any type of strength and conditioning in high school for my team was unheard of. And we made it as far into the playoffs as was common for. I mean,
Right,
we made it very far, is what I'm trying to say. We were
right,
a really good team. We were a really good program, even in high school. When I got to college, which is a Division I program,
right,
we had no strength and conditioning coach. We had a
right.
weight room that we shared with the rest of the university. They just blocked off certain hours for athletes, and the rest in the other hours for the general population. So we had a program that was designed by my head coach at the time, and she did the best she could. But looking back on it now, there was no foundation in any type of scientific principles, or there was no real in fact, I remember very clearly, as an athlete in a Division I program, just feeling like our strength and conditioning program. This is when I started to understand a little bit more of the science from the classes that I was taking, may actually be hurting our team. And so, that's one thing that I do tell my students right away is, listen, just because you have a program or a strength and conditioning coach, there are always three possible outcomes to that program. Number one, you improve. Number two, you maintain. Or number three, you actually get worse. And that concept blows their mind, because they think of, having a coach, you're automatically going to get better.
Right.
It doesn't always translate. And so at that time, only our men's basketball team had a certified strength and conditioning coach. Now it's a much better program now. And I will say that even it's come so far that one of my roles in South Carolina, one of the organizations that I work with is our South Carolina Athletic Coaches Association, which is high school coaches, mostly. I mean, it can include others, but primarily high school coaches. And one of my initiatives is to help high schools, certify, educate themselves to prepare for the certification exam in strength and conditioning, just to move that field, even in our high schools. So now we have high schools that have a dedicated strength and conditioning professional, not just a coach, a professional.
There's a difference.
There is a significant
Dr. Boyd, say that again. A professional.
A professional.
And God bless all the coaches and the football coaches and the track coaches who say they know what's going on in the weight room and they want to take that over. God bless them for being proactive. However, you're a professional track coach. You're a professional football coach. You've been cross-trained. You've been cross-trained in some areas, but this is what I do every day.
That's right. That's right. And I strongly believe that we have to change the expectation. We have to change the terminology of that, which it is. It's changing on its own.
It's changing. Yeah, we're going to get into the terminology, but
yes.
But the other thing that I say has kind of, for our profession, has been a weight on our back, is that while it's great that everybody can be, well, I have an opinion. It's okay that everybody can go get your CSCS,
right?
But everybody shouldn't practice.
Yes.
Everybody's not meant to practice.
This is the analogy, that I use. Everybody who passes a rules exam for a sport doesn't make a great referee or official. So if you think about that just because you know the rules doesn't necessarily mean when it comes game time you can make the right calls. So
it's hard to be a full-time athletic trainer and a full-time strength coach. That's an impossible task if you think about what it really all entails.
That's right.
That's two jobs that can take 60, 70 hours a week.
I agree.
And to put that on, especially to put that on anyone is I think is detrimental to both professions. But to put that and the profession of performance, period. But to put that especially on our younger folks coming in, think about this. Think about this, Dr. Boyd. You've now been hired as the strength conditioning coach or the athletic trainer, the head athletic trainer, and you're going to take over strength and conditioning, both full-time jobs, and you're starting a new program, and you've been in strength conditioning 3-4 years.
That's right. Or you're a assistant football coach that just happens to also work out, and you are just assigned the role of strength coach for the team or for whoever, because that's the very traditional way, especially in South Carolina, that you're in the weight.
Listen. I don't do this very often, but I'm going to do it here. I was in South Carolina, like I said, for almost 20 years. And I visited a bunch of schools, to include your university, early on.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to every one of those schools, high schools and colleges, because some of the smaller colleges, and I'm not going to start rattling through them, but we know all of them in the area,
Mm-hmm.
didn't have strength coach or their football coach with the strength coach. So I would go to the strength coach and I would go, "Hey, coach, let me. I I've got at the time I had what 17, 18 years experience
Yeah.
doing this. I said, listen, let me be a value added proposition for your team. Well, okay, coach, I played football in college too. I understand. That's why I'm trying to be a value added thing for
Mm-hmm.
you. You tell me what you want, generally how you want to go about doing it, and I'll design an appropriate program that will help you get your team where you need it. Well, I'm using this. Well, how do you individualize it once you put the general program out there? What do
That's
you mean?
right.
What do you mean? I said every program. And I'll let you talk. Go after this, Doc. But every program out there that's designed, and you know this, I know you know this, only helps about 85% of the people. Those are the great ones. The great programs are only going to touch about 85% of the people. When you start to individualize those programs, then you start to get those outliers. The people that need more, the people that need less, the people that need something a little different on the sides. That's where if you're not a professional, you're gonna miss out on really taking your team preparation to the next. I hate to say
Yes.
next level, but anyway, further. Anyway, go
Yes,
ahead.
I couldn't agree more. And you can look at that in a couple of ways. Number one, there's too many, we call them cookie cutter, but there's too many programs out there that are they're the same across all sports. So your girls softball team is doing the same type of lifts as your football program or
Right,
whatnot. I will say that football we've certainly benefited from the popularity of football in this nation, because that's
right,
certainly been a driving factor, right? But I totally agree, because even on a football team or a basketball team is another great example. There are very few players that play the exact same position, and so for that reason, the needs analysis of the sport is very different. The way that you're
right.
going to train your receivers, your position is going to look a lot different than the types of programs and training that your linebackers and that even your linemen need to do. It needs to be what you said is a very individualized approach. Because even if I look at a very good team, I mean, we'll take the sport of basketball. That's a one that I have worked with in the past. And you take a position that's the same. Let's say a center position or someone that's going to dominate the paint for you. Even if those two individuals have similar playing styles, they may have very different needs from a training and conditioning perspective.
Yes.
I can think of one team in particular that I have followed very closely that at one time had two individuals at that position. One needed to lose some weight and lean up a little bit, and the other one needed to pack on some pounds to prepare for the contact that he was going to. And you can look at women too, that they're going to
Right.
receive at that position. It has to be individual. It's not going to, like you said, it's not going to be as successful as possible. You may see some benefit, but it's not going to be as effective as what it should be unless there's an individualized approach. And it's difficult, I will say this, that if the resources aren't there for the strength and conditioning professional to take time to do that, that's also going to be very challenging. So you may have a very well qualified strength and conditioning professional, but if there isn't time, if there isn't resources, if there isn't certain variables, if head coaches aren't bought into the amount of time they're giving that professional, then the
Yeah,
outcome is going to be less than effective as well.
that time resource becomes critical across the board. He needs time with the athletes. He needs time to develop a program. He needs time, period.
That's
You
right.
know, and or she needs time to break down what you're already doing and analyze and assess that, or she needs time to, hey, teach the people that are going to work with her. To all that stuff requires time.
That's right.
um
It requires time.
and so and I know that sometimes I preach to the choir when I get on my podcast. I know you guys already know, but good gracious, don't be afraid to let another professional see what you're doing, because oftentimes they may have a gold nugget for you and say, "Hey, you ever thought about this?" If
Yes.
Be careful who you trust, in the sense of not everybody's a professional, but are you going to let me walk into your program if you don't think I'm a professional?
And I think that's a great point. And it also bears to the fact that sometimes we too quickly especially in the performance world, and maybe not everyone, but I think that the individuals that are just getting kind of, comfortable in the setting, they really latch on to another individual's opinions or thoughts or
Yep.
programming style. And, my advice is to know enough to create your own and work to that knowledge. And I often tell my students, do not rely on your experience. Too often we rely on, well, this worked for me, or this is what
Right.
I did when I was an athlete. You have to rely on your knowledge, and then you supplement that with your experience. Your experience can certainly play a role, but it should not drive everything that you do. It needs to be knowledge based, and because it is going to be so different for everyone.
That's the only way we grow and continue to grow as a profession. And I always push back against, well, we've always done it this way.
That's right. Yes,
Well, okay, that's great. You've always done it this way. How's it working?
that's right. That's right.
Is it still producing benefits for you? Do you still get, well, maybe try this. Well, we've never tried that before. Well, I know when we step from the profession a little bit, and into the classroom, what are the things that you see right now from an instructor's perspective, and a program director's perspective, and all that? What are the things that you see from the education standpoint that we need to incorporate more or less of? Because sometimes we don't
Mhm.
need that.
That's right.
You know what I mean? We don't need that. They can get that in an internship.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think so. That's also a great conversation. But I think just kind of scratching the surface is, generally speaking, our students are very, or I should say, they're more comfortable with the classroom content, right? Like let's review anatomy, physiology, bioenergetics, biomechanics. And while those are still hard concepts for them, they're much more comfortable in that role. They may not be experts yet. They may really
Right.
still need to study, but
Right.
they're much more comfortable in that role. They become less comfortable when I put them in the moment. So when I ask them to teach me a squat, and I may have some aggravating knee pain, what are you going to do? Then they start to freeze up. They're struggling with those. I think students today, and we do, right now is a very challenging time, because many of the students that we have in our 4-year programs currently within this time frame right now, they were juniors and seniors in high school during 2020. So
Right.
what they may not have had normal, classroom experiences senior and freshman year of college. And so that's shaped them a little differently. And so while we have students that are very eager to learn, I think the practical component, the hands-on teaching, the communication style, the, figuring out how to instruct someone is the first area that I would say we have to focus. We have to get them comfortable talking, leading, teaching, building rapport, understanding that each person is different. That, and I try to teach them to have a buffet of squats that they can teach, for example.
Right.
That they have a whole, range of options, so that any version of that squat can work for any person that they come in contact with that they're trying to help improve. So I would say that's the first thing for sure. And then, we could go down a whole list of other areas, but I think it's that experience in the classroom that then translates better for them in their internships. So we have students that, because they have very little of the practical hands-on, building
Right.
communication skills, that when they get into their internship, the first, month is like deer in the headlights. They are just, it's hard for them to learn or progress or absorb, because they're so stressed at trying to understand what that role looks like, if that makes sense. So we got to do a better job, from the day they start their programs, to getting comfortable leading, guiding, and teaching individuals, regardless of what population they're going to work with from the beginning. And then those scientific principles can start to kick in a little more, because you're going to default under those periods of stress. You're going to default to what you think is normal. And so students that will do great on a paper test or a computer-based test, when I put them in the moment and I ask them some of the same questions and I'm stressing them one-on-one, they're defaulting to answers that make no sense. And they're,
Right. How much of that do you think is societal and cultural today?
oh,
With
absolutely.
because I've had interns come to me, and I've taken quite a few over the years, especially there in South Carolina. Um, and And the first thing they ask me is, how do you know X, or how do you know Y, or how do you know to tell them that or tell them this? And I look at him and I go, okay, when he walked in my office the first time, I realized that there would likely be some valgus stress on his left side because of X.
Right.
So when we go to teach a squat, these are the things I'm paying attention to, and I always focus on the basic, alignment and posture.
Yes.
How did you know that? Well, I watched, then I talked to him to see how he felt, and then I just kind of, walked my way through it and talked him through how we wanted him to do that squat. Now I made all that part up, but that's the kind of conversations I would have.
Yeah, and a couple of things, because higher education is so challenging in some aspects. We only have a certain number of credit hours that we can really devote to what we need to teach. And so I'll be honest with you, while I absolutely use that, what you just mentioned, I'm already assessing an individual before we even, have a
Yeah,
conversation. I'm
yeah,
already looking at motor patterns and gaits and
yeah.
areas of dysfunction that are likely due to a variety of things, right? Muscle
Anything, yeah.
imbalance. Yes, I'm doing that, but unfortunately, within our program, it's really hard for us to have those conversations, just because we have to focus on those scientific, the basics first, and we only have so
Yeah.
many credit hours that we can use. So, what I really, and your point about the cultural and just societal and where we are is absolutely true, because our students are kind of one spectrum or the other. They really don't know a lot about working out at all. Like they don't come in as workout buffs. They
Right.
haven't really experienced what it's like to train with the team, or to, compete beyond a certain middle school or
Right.
maybe rec league level, to be honest. But they think they want to do something along the lines of rehabilitation or therapy or strength and conditioning, potentially
Right.
athletic training. And then we have those students that are on complete opposite end, where they are driven by a lot of what they see on social media. And so
Oh,
kind of trying to bring both of those together, towards the middle, is certainly a challenge, because that's really what we see. We see kind of the completely inexperienced individual who is looking into a program like this, or we have individuals who they believe everything they read.
let's
I
talk
mean,
about
everything.
let's talk about that part just for a second. And really, what I think, some of, our peers now, that we have quite a few listeners who are our peers that we get notes from, and they say, well, you talked about this with X, did you plan on going deeper with somebody else, or was it just a one time thing, or can you expand on that, or can we have a conversation about that? So I'm going to ask you this question. You got you have this social media. It's not a phenomenon anymore. It's a tsunami.
It is.
A tsunami of just horrible information. And I'm only talking about the strength and conditioning, and all those professions that touch performance, from supplementation to some ridiculous exercise you're supposed to do to, some kind of drill you're supposed to run that's inappropriate for all sports, much less the one sport they're trying to, push it off on. What has been your best approach to trying to get students to understand you can't believe everything, learn and understand the knowledge, but you can't learn from everywhere. You have to be able to tell the difference when you're getting bad information and when you're not.
Yeah.
And that's hard. That's hard for some professionals to do right now. So.
It is, absolutely. And I'll be honest, I have stopped really following in really looking into a lot of the social media, because it became so overwhelming for me as a scientist. I pride myself on science and
Right.
real true understanding, and the bridge between the science and coaching styles, and how you become a real leader, and how you try to positively improve individuals, first off to be better humans, and second off to be better athletes or whatever. Really, Twitter and, X now and Instagram and all of those, I have had a hard time finding the more positive than negative. Let me put it that way. And so I made a decision for myself and my own mental health that I just can't rely on all these things, because and I would sometimes years ago I would respond and say, this isn't safe for everybody, or something like that. And
Right.
And it just became too consuming. So I work with my students on first being comfortable looking at research, like really truly understanding research. And listen, research isn't like an end all of all.
No, it's not perfect. I mean,
it's not perfect. But when you know how to read it, and when you understand how to take the information that it's providing you, then you can apply that information, more appropriately.
There's a seriousness about research that's not in social media.
That's it. That's it. And
there's a seriousness about it that, okay, you're trying to, I've read some research that has later been proven to be, that wasn't correct, but it was serious.
Yeah.
And they showed you why they believed it was correct, and here's how they got to that point, and this is who reviewed their work and all that stuff. No work's getting reviewed on social media. I promise you, it is a send. And
I shared. I did find it's been probably 10 years or so since it was published, but there was a great research article on looking at what they determined to be successful coaches and how those successful coaches got their information. And basically they surveyed and interviewed a lot of coaches. And to make a long story short, the coaches that saw more success to that point that the research was published relied more heavily on, peer-reviewed scientific information. And so it really created a conversation among my students of looking at some of these great coaches that we've had in our lifetime. And maybe they are relying on, real information from some type of evidence-based source. And so I say evidence because that's the term that's the buzzword in my program is EBP, evidence-based practice.
Hey.
Whatever you're going to do, you've got to give me a justification that's rooted within some sort of evidence. And then we can have a conversation about why you're doing it that way, or if it's, maybe there's a potential better way or whatnot. So I think that the answer for me is, as an educator and as a practicing, a professional, is what does the evidence say, And then how can I use that evidence to justify or to make the best case for what can work in this particular situation? And I don't think social media does that. I think that if social media took an approach of education versus competition versus my way is best and my athletes are
Right.
best, we're all in the same. We're all in the same.
Listen,
We're all in the
listen.
same storm. We may not all be on the same
Yeah,
vessel, the same
it's
storm.
the same storm. And listen, I'm going to tell you, um, there's more than one right way to do things.
Yes.
But I tell the young professionals or the athletes that I work with or the young professionals I mentor, what I tell them is find a way that's correct. I say because there's more than one. As long as you're going this direction, push the profession forward. Don't drag it down. Don't
That's
go
right.
down some rabbit hole that after 5 minutes is
Mm-hmm.
just leave that stuff alone. Don't try to prove or disprove it because immediately you know where it's going. And when it's going the wrong way, the wrong direction, and you're not pushing the profession forward, you're not helping anybody, especially yourself. You know,
And have the approach that you can be wrong, right? And like be okay with that and
man,
correction.
I tell you what, I became a much better coach, practitioner, teacher, professional, mentor as soon as I figured out that I was wrong a lot,
I agree.
and there were a whole bunch of people that could help me be right at least a little more than I was at that current point in my career. But understanding that being wrong can be either a springboard or a weight. I mean, because now, I'm an old guy, so now if I'm wrong, I'm like, okay, well, somebody tell me what's right. I'm looking for
That's,
the first person. I'm looking for the
yeah.
first person that can tell me what's right, as
Yes.
opposed to being a bit of a meathead back in the day and a little bit ego driven and those kind of things. Because for a guy of my stature, I challenged anyone in the weight room pound for pound and weight for weight, exercise
Right.
for. After I got past that and realized that helping other athletes get better wasn't about really me, it was about developing more of a service mentality and approach to the profession, and then to the athlete, opening up all the areas that could help me. Nutrition, talk to nutritionists, psychology, talk to educators, and talk to the biggest resource. And I'm not saying this because you're on here, because I've talked to Sarah Terrell and several other professional
Hmm.
educators. You guys are the hidden resource.
Yeah.
Because if you want to, if you there's strength coaches out there. And I've been one of them that time looking for research when I could have went right down to the local university
Yeah.
and probably been pointed to the research I was looking for.
I agree.
So,
Agree.
I think strength coaches and other practitioners, man, if they're not using you, just I would suggest to them, as an old guy in this profession, hey, when you hit a spot where you're stuck, go back to the beginning, which is usually your education. And if you can't figure it out, there's usually somebody in the field that can assist you with that and may have the answer for you. But you got to
I
ask.
You do. And I think my career became a lot easier in the different things that I do when I surrounded myself with people who worked hard and who had very similar mindsets and were humble enough to say, I can do it, I can't do it, or I was wrong, this way, that way. And when I truly felt, when we've created that collegial mentality within our program is really strong, and we are pushing forward. But I will say to you that back in my decision making, when I had to make a decision as a graduate student, because I had finished my undergrad, I knew this was what I wanted to do. But at that point in time, there wasn't as many opportunities for females in the field.
Right.
And my mentor, we had a really hard conversation. It was, you can go down the coach path and hope things work out, or you can go academic and know things will work out, as far as career and scheduling and things of that nature. And it was really hard for me. But at the time, I chose the academic role to get my PhD in this program and try to push the field in a different way, and been able to still maintain some athlete contact and coaching opportunities through that role. But I totally agree with you. During that process, what I saw is that at most universities, the split, it probably wasn't together in the first place, but there was this
Right.
real creation of distance between the academic roles and the professionals in the field and the coaching staff. And so we've worked at Winthrop to work together. Here's an example. We are, in my role, have more capability to apply for certain types of grants that are research and academic based grants. Sometimes those are bigger grants. So we've been able to create grants to get things here, to purchase, items and
Right.
devices that can help work with our athletes in the training world. In our program, we have a sports psychologist, and he works with those athletes in the performance world. We have a certified, sports dietitian that works, with those athletes in our training facility. So we've had to reach out to bridge those networks because they weren't bridged before. So it was a very active role in both sides reaching out to say, we can help each other. Let's try to create this connection as best we can. But that took effort. Those
I can tell you,
those tracks weren't laid for us. We had to do the work to do that.
I can tell you they weren't, because Winthrop was one of the schools back in the day that I wanted to try to make inroads at. Let's put it that way.
Right.
I don't want to. What I don't want to do is try to sound like I'm bashing any school, because I'm not. Because it was tough all around back then, and every school, and it wasn't always bad blood, but it was misunderstanding. You know what I mean? So it was. So I walk in there, and I have a coach or professor, and they're looking at me and they're like, "Okay, what are you trying to do?" And it's just one guy, pretty bold, walking into the office, saying what I'm going to say. Here's my pitch, and I'm not really trying to sell you anything. I'm trying to show you that this is value, like I said earlier, value added. I'm not asking you to pay me. I'm not asking you to pay me any kind of top rate. I was just trying to, one, break in the South Carolina area. And I did eventually get to do some talk at some schools and some guest speaking and stuff like that. But it took a little bit, because nobody really, they said, here's this guy walking in here. He's got his neck is thicker than his head, and he wants to do what? What is he talking about? And then of course, I walk into some of the other schools, and it's the football coach looking at me, and he's like, I don't have time for that, coach. You don't need time. But you're the gatekeeper.
Yeah.
I need your blessing so that
That's
I can
right.
help, so that I can help you help your athletes. One coach, and I won't say the school because everybody, or the athlete, because everybody will know what school. But right there in South Carolina, I said, look, I've been working with this athlete for 4 years, and look at his progress. Who, you work with such and such? Yeah. I said, that's not all me. He's done the work. I said, but our approach has been this. I said, and your approach in your system has been this. He went from an athlete who you guys thought was always injured to this athlete. Now he's all conference and second team All-American and yada, yada, yada. Finally, he opened the door, but then he left the school, and the other coach wanted to go another way. That's another problem in our field.
Yeah.
Where our jobs as strength coaches, totally unrelated to to the sport coach is controlled by the sport coach.
Yes.
That
Yes.
shouldn't be either. So that's another conversation. But when we talk about the academic side, which in this late in my career, because I'm never retiring, so I'm looking for places again. I'm back to square one, looking for places where I can give back and come in and speak on whatever topic the profession has to offer at that time, or my own experiences or whatever. And I'm doing that over here in Texas, so I'm in a brand new part of the world, the country, and it's the same but different because
Yeah.
I started this podcast. I said I'm just going to talk to other professionals, and we're going to talk about stuff in the profession. So that's why I look up people like you, Dr. Boyd.
Well, I think it's awesome. And this is what we need. We need to have, more open dialogue and conversations. And so in one of my roles with the NSCA as the South Carolina State Director, that was a constant feedback is we just want opportunities to come together, to talk to each other, find some of those areas where we have some shared challenges and we've had some shared solutions. And we've been able to do some of that within our different clinics and so forth, things that we've had over the last couple of years.
Now hold those thoughts, because it got a little shaky for the NSCA state chapter there in South Carolina for a while. When I was there, I refused. I went to North Carolina's stuff, or I went over to Georgia, because I can tell by talking to you that you've opened up and are welcoming different stuff.
Yeah. I was took over as state director in 2018. And I can tell you, I didn't know much about where the state was at that time. To be honest, I wasn't overly active for some of the reasons you just mentioned.
Right.
No one knew anything about it. And so Coach Darnell Clark, Dr. Darnell Clark now, reached out and asked me to consider. We had a great relationship with some students going up to intern with him. And we were able to really, my advisory board and I were able to turn it around to completely.
I'm glad, because you know what? I was really into the NSCA. I still am, really. And I approached the South Carolina chapter about inclusion, because I went to several different things where it was the same speaker all the time, everywhere. And I was like, hey, I said, if you don't want to have me on, have, Dr. So-and-so on, or have, Coach So-and-so on. These are great strength people, professionals in performance that have something to offer. And, the group that was in there at the time just didn't want to. I was like, okay, I'm going to stop whining. But I don't like closed doors.
No, and I do feel I need to say this, because this has been my focal point as a professional, as an educator, as a leader in any realm that I can, is that we must have that. And we worked hard to do that for our clinics. But I firmly believe that if you are in a leadership position and you are creating opportunities, whether it be interns, assistant coaching opportunities, if you're designing clinics, you absolutely must incorporate as much diversity across your presentations as possible. And I mean diversity for gender. There needs to be more female speakers and leaders in our field. I mean diversity in race and cultural competency. There's too many times where you're exactly right. The speakers are all the same, and while they may have great information to share, it really takes away a lot of the interest from some of our fellow colleagues in the field, and it's just not appropriate.
And they don't get to learn either, though. They don't get to. I mean, if I'm working in this single bubble, and we're considered the authority on these things, especially for this area, but we're not bringing in, others and new ideas, and it's all the same, and it gets to a point to where it gets a little stale,
And it's,
and it
yeah,
gets and it's kind of one view, one,
mhm.
and then that's when we start to run into trouble where, if you don't think it's this way, then you're out. And if you
Yes.
don't think it's that way, then you're out. And then when you
Yes.
start operating on who you're trying to keep out and stuff like that, especially in a profession like this one, when you start operating that way, you're going to have more people out than in, and
Yes.
the people you have in, I hate to use the term, but are going to be inbred.
It is. It's
It,
appropriate to say
it's
that.
it's not a it's not a good situation. So, yeah, when I saw that, by the way, we were going to talk. I was going to get to, but you beat me there. Um, that was one of the reasons I wanted to have you on.
Well, thank you.
But only one. There were several reasons I wanted to have you on, but I also like to think that we've been leaders with our podcast in having females from the profession in, whereas a lot of other podcasts that we've, some of them I follow and look at and I like them, and they're great, but there's never any diversity on them.
Hmm.
Never.
Hmm.
There's not a woman. There's not an African American. There's not an Asian. And I'm like, there's some other people out there.
Yes. Yes.
And there's some other professionals out there. And just because you're a nutritionist doesn't mean you have to be a woman. It's even been that way. I've seen,
Yeah.
and I've had guys on that are nutritionists. Just,
Mhm.
I talk to other folks. I said, don't turn your nose up when somebody says sports psychology,
Yes.
because
Absolutely.
because you don't understand how much of a psychological impact, especially young college students have when they first arrive to the university. When they get
Yes.
there, it's psychologically, it's a bombshell.
Yes. Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. It's a change that's hard to adjust
yeah,
to.
yeah,
Sure.
you go from being oftentimes number one in your household because you might have been the firstborn, to
Right.
number one in your grade school and on your sports team and all of that. And now you walk in, even if you're coming in as an athlete, you walk in low man or low woman on the totem pole. And
I call it.
you might be a celebrated star in high school, but no one
Yes.
cares. And
That's right.
literally nobody cares.
No one cares. I call it the hometown hero syndrome.
Yes.
That's my term for it. Is you go from being the hero to pretty much a zero, and I mean that in a kind way.
Yes.
You know what I
Yes.
mean? But that's the truth, and that is hard. It's really
Yeah.
hard.
When we
But
say GOAT, we don't mean the greatest of all time. We mean GOAT.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, but no. So I always hate getting to this time in the podcast because production team wants me to wrap it up at when we start getting close to an hour, because then they have to do certain things to splice all the stuff together. I really just think they don't want to do the work. But anyway, um, let me have this final question. What would be your advice to anyone thinking about getting into one of the professions in performance? Strength and conditioning, athletic training, psychology, nutrition. If it has to do with dealing with performance and or exercise science, whether it's academic, coaching, whatever. What would be your advice?
I think my advice is going to be a little different than what most people I've heard, say in response to something like this. I took the approach of exposing myself to anything and everything that I could, anything that was, when I say any area of performance that I could possibly experience, study, become certified in. I did my absolute best to understand what those kind of, what components were involved. And I do think that has really provided assets in my career that I may not have had if I just focused on one thing and went solely for that one thing. Now, if that's how individuals work, they want to focus on one area only and learn as much as they can about one area. Know your learning style, or
Right.
at least your preferred style. Know what drives you, and really focus on those things. But I would say, certainly, kind of to sum up what we've talked about, is don't have closed ears and closed eyes. Really have a full, a multidimensional open door approach to what it is that you're interested in, and learning as much about that as you can, and anything that's related to that as possible. For example, one of my favorite areas that I stumbled upon, really in my career, was the concept of corrective exercise. And what does that even
Oh,
mean?
yeah.
How do we do that? What does that mean for a strength and conditioning professional? And once I really started to learn about that, it opened up doors I never even knew existed. And really, I found a passion and a love that, that I could name, that I could really pinpoint. And so I would say, if you're interested in this career, or any related component of that, trying to just be open minded to everything that you can learn about it, and think critically about each way that you can use that information, that you can, progress from that, and seeing it as a constant vertical progression. Everything should build,
Right.
to where you want to be.
Well,
Well,
Dr. Boyd,
Dr. Boyd,
Joni,
John. Yes.
it has
It has
been
been
a pleasure
a
having you
pleasure.
on. Hopefully,
Has
we
been.
can do this again in the future.
Absolutely.
I appreciate your time. I know our listeners will appreciate everything that you've said. Um, so you're going to get invited back, just so you know.
That sounds great. Let's do it.
Yeah. All righty. So this has been Performance Talk. My name is Yul Gordon. My partner will be back with us next time. We have talked to Dr. Joni Boyd, and it has been great. Thank you all.